Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast. Chris Todd Mitten here, and we have a guest today that I want to introduce. But first, how are you doing today, Chris?
Great, Todd. Glad to be here.
Good to see you.
Yep. It's always a pleasure to be in your company.
Well, I realize that, but you don't have to bring that up to the listeners. So this is kind of exciting. We have a guest today who's a longtime friend of mine, a longtime Kansas City pilot, but a fascinating background to include military flying, airline flying, general aviation, and now a businessman in the aviation world. So Craig Wilcox, welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast.
Thank you, Todd. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
I appreciate you coming out and talking to us, because I think our listeners are going to find you interesting. And you know, you're not a guy that slows down. You retired from Southwest Airlines, and we'll talk about all that in a little bit. You retired recently, and we're super excited. This project that you're a key member of now, Arrowhead Airpark. So I'm anxious to talk to you about that today and learn more about your airport housing development here in the Kansas City area. And so I think, but I really think it's important, because I've known you a long time, and you have such an interesting and varied background. You grew up here in the Kansas City area, right?
I did.
And did you learn to fly here initially many moons ago?
No, I should have, but I wasn't a very smart teenager, so I didn't really pursue it. To me, flying was like being an astronaut or a star quarterback in the NFL. It was just such a dream that was so out there that I just didn't ever think it was possible. But I always wanted to be a pilot. And if you'll allow me to tell a short story, it's my high school counselor that actually made this happen. I went in my senior year at the beginning, and he said, "Well, Craig, what do you want to do with your life? You're going to go to college? Where are you going to be in a few years?" Well, I'm just a dumb teenager, kind of all thrust, no rudder. And I said, "Gosh, I don't know. I guess I'll try to go to college." And he said, "Well, how will you pay for that? Because I'm looking at your records, and an academic scholarship is out of the question." But I said, "Well, my parents probably can help me a little bit, but not a whole lot." And I said, "But I did get this postcard from Air Force ROTC the other day, and I guess they have scholarships." And this counselor, instead of saying, "Oh, that's nice, well, why don't you give them a call and come back to me if you have any questions?" Instead, he reached down, opened his drawer, pulled out a Rolodex. You're old enough. I know you know what that is.
I do know.
Pulled out a phone card for the colonel in charge of the ROTC program down at MU in Columbia. Wow. Called the colonel on the spot. Of course, I'm sitting back there going, "No, wait, I'm not sure. I just I don't know." He didn't have time for any of that. He arranged a meeting for that Saturday with the colonel, and I went down and found out, gosh, they'll pay for my school and make me a pilot. I mean, what could be better than that? Wow. So that's how it all kind of started. Now, I had speed bumps along the way. I didn't get into pilot training immediately, but yeah, I didn't do any flying training until I was actually on active duty in the Air Force. And
then you started flying. Where'd you go to pilot training?
Williams in Phoenix.
Oh, there's among the closed Air Force bases.
Yeah.
No, that was probably a good deal, though. Willie, as it was known, was.
Oh yeah.
Did you have fun at pilot training when you were? Did you realize when you got there and got involved in this that, man, I really like this, and I'm glad I chose this career?
Yes, and actually, like I said, I didn't get into pilot training immediately. I was in college, and once again, I was not an academic wizard. So when they had the cutback, because the Vietnam War ended and they had to cut a bunch of pilot slots, I was on the chopping block. So I did not get a pilot slot out of college. So I was a radar controller for 3 years in Tucson first.
Forgot about that.
How about that? I honestly think that may have been a gift in disguise, because when I did get into pilot training, after 3 years, I did not take anything for granted. I knew how valuable it was and how privileged I was to get to do that. Where if I'd just gone right out of college, I don't think my attitude would have been quite as mature. But yeah, by the time I got to pilot training, I already had my private license from flying little airplanes in the Aero Club in Tucson, and then did well enough in pilot training to get an F-111. I definitely wanted fighters by the time I got that far, and had a ball, but I kind of wish I'd dialed it back about 10% and had a little more fun, because I was into the books and so focused on doing well that I think I could have had more fun and maybe even done better if I just lightened up a little bit. But it was still great.
What pilot training class were you in?
AT201.
8201.
No, I did it backwards. 8102.
8102.
Yeah, 8102. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. And then, and you were a 111 guy for a period of time, and then I know you went on to another airframe from that, F-15Es, right?
Correct.
Were you initial cadre in that? Am I wrong on that?
No, you remembered correctly.
Yeah.
So there were, I believe it was 20 pilots nationwide that were selected to go and start the new Strike Eagle, and so felt very lucky to get to do that.
It's kind of fascinating because right off the bat, you're talking about being academic, but you obviously at some point matured in life and said, well, even if I'm not immediately, I'm going to study hard enough to be one of the top guys, because I don't think they'd have selected you if you were just another. I mean, that's pretty neat that you got to do that. How long did you fly that airplane?
I flew that almost 7 years.
Wow.
And I flew the F-111 about 8 years.
Yeah, and you retired at 15 years or something.
17 years.
17 years.
Uh-huh.
It was one of those good deals, kind of.
Yeah,
in some regards.
Turned out to be a pretty good deal. Early retirement.
And were you flying general aviation some then while you were in the Air Force also, or just kind of?
No, I actually I was so busy during the Air Force active duty that I just didn't really have the time, and so it wasn't until I retired that I started renting airplanes again and kind of getting back into it. And then in my Southwest career, I finally got to a point where I could purchase an airplane. So I bought my Bonanza about 18 years ago.
Okay.
And I still have that. It's out in the hangar just a couple hundred yards away.
That's my one of my tie-ins with Craig was getting to fly his Bonanza.
Right, yeah.
And what fun that has been. And I miss flying it, honestly. But so what year were you hired at Southwest?
1996.
96. And you had a long career then,
24 years.
24 years. We got to, we'll save Craig's last Southwest trip for when we talk in a moment here about some other things Craig's done. You had a great Finney flight at the
Oh,
airline.
yeah, on landing.
I know, and just a great story that we'll have to get into. So then you were flying with Southwest and started getting back into general aviation, got your Bonanza. What were you doing with your Bonanza over that time? Just kind of having fun, taking little trips? Or?
We actually lived in Arizona for my first 10 years with Southwest, and I always wanted to live on an Airpark, and there was one up north called Mogollon Airpark that had a long paved runway, and you're up in the pine trees in the high country of Arizona, so really, really nice. But I used to joke, you remember that song from years ago, Livin' La Vida Loca? Mm-hmm. Well, I was living La Vida Captain, so I was a first officer, but trying to live the captain lifestyle. So I had a house in the valley, and then we bought a cabin up at that Airpark, because that's all we could afford. It was one of the cheapest properties up there, but it allowed me to go up there in the summer and escape the heat. And then eventually I got my airplane and didn't have to rent anymore. I could actually fly up there. And so,
how far outside of Phoenix?
It's about a 3-hour drive or a 45-minute flight.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so not bad at all flying. And Phoenix sits at about 1,000 feet. MSL and this Airpark was at 6,600. So
Oh,
a
wow.
significant difference in temperature. And
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons I bought the Bonanza, because I needed horsepower.
Sure.
You know, a little 172, there were days when it couldn't take off up there because the density altitude got so high.
Yeah. So you then you moved back to Kansas City. What year was that?
That was 2006.
06.
Is that when you moved to Smithville then?
Yes.
And where you are currently?
Yes.
Okay.
When we moved from Phoenix, because by then I was into general aviation pretty heavy and having my own airplane and the Airpark and everything. So there were no Airparks here that were really available. We needed to live close to town for family reasons. And so I tried to buy land where I could either have a house or build a house and have a little grass strip, you know, that every airline pilot's dream.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I couldn't put all the factors together. It was either too far away, or the land was unsuitable, or it was out of our price range, or the house was junk. So we ended up buying in Smithville. Very nice property, very nice house, but you can land maybe a helicopter there, but that's about it. It's very hilly and lots of trees. So
It occurs to me that a lot of your life ends up foreshadowing something later in life. You know, I mean, because flying fighters, you probably one of the things you really enjoyed was formation flying. We'll talk about that, but then and then you had an Airpark years ago, and now here you are in the development of an Airpark. So interesting how you know you've kept that consistent thought process over the years.
You know, and this, if I can say that this Airpark community that you're developing is interesting because, you know, as you well know, I don't think that there's a decent Airpark community in this metro area. There's a few of them, and there's some that are nicer than others, but they're not what I would call viable or worth investing money in a house that I thought I could probably sell down the road. You know, it's unlike Phoenix or Dallas or Chicago or Denver, where there's high population density of pilots with the income to do that. We don't have that here by and large. And so I'm interested in how that's going to tie into what you guys are doing, because you guys are developing something that is going to be, I think, an investable property that is not going to turn into an RV storage location down the road. So.
Yeah, that's our goal. One of the primary features of this development will be the paved runway, because there are several Airparks in the area and in Missouri and Kansas. Pretty much they're all 2,600 feet grass strips or shorter. And that means in weather like this, the airport's closed, and it might stay closed for a month because the ground gets soggy and you just can't fly off of it. So the runway, you know, puts it a notch above other Airpark properties. This will be the only paved Airpark in pretty much the Kansas City area. You know, Wichita has Stearman, but that's pretty much the closest one. Poplar Grove in Illinois, Troy Airpark over by St. Louis, those are others, but there's nothing here. So we hope to be the first, and to match that long runway and the you know, having it paved where it's usable year-round, we're going to create it where it's as upscale as possible. So, you know, high-end homes, nice landscaping, nice curb appeal, fencing, security, kind of the whole package. Because we want people to go in, and instead of saying, oh, it's a bunch of hangars and a runway, we want them to drive in and go, wow, this place is incredible.
Almost like a country club with a great golf course, which people can see is the center of the country of the a development built around a golf course. You know, people see the golf course is the center, and in your case, you want the airport to be.
Yes, and that's a really good analogy. Is, you know, country clubs are obviously upscale, and people want to build there, and they build there because they want to golf every day. Well, we're going to have a runway where people can fly every day, but still have that upper level aesthetic, where, like you say, it retains value and we appeal to a wider audience.
Now, we kind of got on the subject of Arrowhead Airpark, and I do want to, but I'm not done. Craig won't talk much about himself, but I want to talk about before we get, because
sorry for getting you off track there, Todd.
What's your general aviation background? And I got to tell you, Craig had started a general aviation formation club in this area, the Beach Nuts. And for some of our listeners may know that if you go to Oshkosh, there's groups that fly in a formation type of a scenario so they can all park together at Oshkosh. Well, you started one for this area, a formation training club, so that pilots could be comfortable and checked out, qualified to fly in formation to Oshkosh. And you came up, I don't know who came up with the name Beach Nuts, but was that maybe you? But talk about the Beach Nuts and how you started that and where that formation flying organization is right now.
Before I forget, I'll give Jack Letts credit for the name. Sharp guy and a longtime Beach Nuts member.
Right.
So I got my Bonanza when I lived in Phoenix, and I flew it there for about 2 or 3 years and went back and forth to the Airpark. I gave my friends rides. Family would visit. We'd go out and fly to Sedona or something, fly to Flagstaff. I did some charity flights. But I kind of was done because in our case, we don't like fly to the Bahamas or Mexico like some people do at Bonanzas. So it was all pretty much just me and local flying. Moved back to Missouri, and the weather's not as good here, so I couldn't fly as much. I didn't have an airpark to go to, and I was actually kind of on my way out of general aviation. And then I heard about this Bonanzas to Oshkosh, and this is a group that started over 30 years ago. I can't remember the exact year, but I think this year will be our 33rd year going. So we're the granddaddy of the large formation arrival. And I found about it online and checked into it a little bit and flew it. The first flight I did, I took my father in the right seat, which was kind of a cool thing. And just loved every minute of it. And it's not so much the formation, that's obviously a cool part, but it's the whole overall experience, and then camping with these other 130 airplanes.
Camaraderie.
Yeah. So it's definitely a social event with a really cool formation event thrown in too. So I really jumped into this with both feet and was really glad I'd kept the airplane. And we generally require any Bonanza pilot who wants to fly in this event to go to a formal clinic, because otherwise you can get people who think they have a lot better formation skills than they do. And while I won't say formation flying is dangerous, it can be if you don't know what you're doing. There's just some certain elements of it with closure and overtake and how to handle an overshooting rejoin, things like that, where you have to know what to do. So we have clinics all over the country during the springtime to qualify people every year to do the Bonanzas to Oshkosh flight. So after about 3 years of attending clinics and going to Oshkosh, I volunteered to run a clinic, and that was in 2009. And I think I had maybe 5 pilots show up, and I had to call and get like safety pilots to come in from other places because we didn't have enough experience to even run the clinic. But it went okay, and I did it the next year. And then we started doing it twice a year because we realized a lot of us wanted to fly more advanced formation and do 4-ship. So ever since about 2010, we've been running 2 clinics a year, and that's, so now we're in our 12th or 13th year of that. We're going to have our next clinic the end of April, and I think we've got about 25 signed up. Our largest clinic has been nearly 40 now, and We've had Mooney pilots and Cirrus pilots. So even if they're not going to fly in the Bonanzas to Oshkosh, our training is still really
relevant
good.
to all.
Yeah, and the Beach Nuts group, after we held a clinic or two, the Kansas City locals, we all kind of looked at each other and said, well, that was fun. What are you doing next weekend? Well, let's get together and fly to, Miami County, get some barbecue. So we started doing local formation, and then somebody at Overland Park saw us fly in for a little fly-in thing over there and said, hey, would you guys like to fly for the American Royal Parade? Well, yeah, maybe. And they said, oh, and we'll pay you. Whoa!
Wow!
You got my attention. This kind of fun. So we started doing that, and we had a great year. I can't remember exactly which year it was, but it was the sequestration. Do you remember that, where all the military flyovers kind of went away for a summer? And so they started calling on civilian groups. And we did a Royals game. We did a scouting jamboree at the Speedway. We did 3 KU games and earned a fair amount of money for our hobby, which was just awesome. And
kind of eye-opening, honestly.
Yeah. Now, of course, the military's flying again, so the gigs have kind of
But I think that
it's
away,
still a good group and a lot of fun.
And it's still some of that. It's become more accepted that people like even that kind of a flyover. General aviation. Frankly, it's pretty impressive. Our listeners are in many cases pilots, aircraft owners, and I think they'd be like, oh, that's cool to watch those 8 Bonanzas going over all that nice continental horsepower. And
so I've got to ask, if you have sign-offs, is it fair to say that some people don't qualify? You don't sign them off?
That's completely fair to say. Yes, and they might be excellent pilots to fly single ship and go IFR to Des Moines or something. But we've had pilots who are doing an element takeoff where your leader is only like 50 feet away on the runway, and they're adjusting their engine and tweaking their throttle while they're doing a takeoff roll right next to another airplane. And we have to counsel them harshly that there's nothing in the cockpit you need to look at. You need to look at lead and only at lead when you're in close formation. Some of them get it, and they go on and they're qualified, and others, 2 or 3 flights in a row, we just tell them, find a different hobby.
Yeah.
And perhaps fly to Oshkosh single ship. Do the Rip-on Fisk, because they just don't get it.
Yeah.
I was so impressed when I attended my first clinic, the way it was, because it's run, and you would appreciate this as a former T-38 instructor pilot, and the way you debrief and the way you, it's not a big congratulatory. Everyone's fessing up to what they screwed up, and we're not here to pat you at the end. Hey, good job, but it's not a big let's all self-congratulate one another and skip over the mistakes that were made. It's actually pretty. It can be kind of intense, at times. Certainly, the flying can be intense. As long-time listeners know, I was a career navigator, not a pilot. So in the military, so I didn't learn formation flying hands-on. I'm out there learning it in Craig's Bonanza, and it's gives you a lot of respect for people who do it well, because it's a challenge. But our listeners, if you own a Bonanza or even Mooney or Cirrus or whatever, how could they be part of the clinic or an upcoming clinic? How can they learn more about the Beach Nuts as far as getting in touch with someone?
I would say just contact me directly. So let's do it through the Arrowhead Airpark email address, so we don't.
Sure, and we'll give that out here in a while.
But yeah, I'm happy to talk to anybody, and or just go online and search for formation clinics, because some are tailored towards cabin class aircraft like a Bonanza or a Mooney. Others are appropriate for RVs, smaller, more maneuverable planes, and they don't necessarily play well together. The performance difference is enough where you should kind of fly with the same type aircraft.
Sure, and the clinic, the Beach Nuts clinic, twice a year is held at St. Joseph, Missouri. So,
thanks to you.
Well,
perfect location.
No, that was a great. It is a great spot. The airport up there, everyone loves it, and it's so cool if you have a large clinic doing there's always a graduation exercise and a bunch of airplanes. First of all, just the engines running on the ramp is enough to go up there just to listen to. I mean, I kid you not, it's fantastic. And then all these airplanes taking off in a formation gaggle, and it's quite a sight to see. And the local people now in St. Joe have gotten used to seeing it. Oh yeah, those guys are flying again. And I have people tell me about it. Yeah, I saw you guys. They like it up there.
Yeah, for our big Sunday morning finale, either the Bonanzas to Oshkosh mini flight, like the practice flight, or for the advanced clinic, the showcase flight. We try to overfly the city on at least one of our legs to let everybody take a look. If you don't mind, I would like to take a moment and go back to the debrief thing you were talking about.
Of course.
How it can be a little intense in a clinic. I had to tailor my management of a clinic and management of formation training a little bit, because coming from the Air Force and coming from a fighter pilot background, it's pretty much there is no gray. Everything is black and white. Yeah. Everything is very strict, very disciplined. And, if you're 30 seconds late for the briefing, the door's closed to see you. Well, I had to realize early on that I'm not dealing with other fighter pilots. I'm dealing with civilians who didn't go through the military. They don't quite understand that discipline and structure. And if I'm too strict and I'm too much of a taskmaster, then they'll take their airplane and I won't have anybody to play with. So I learned to mellow out just a little bit. We need obviously enough discipline to keep it safe.
Right.
But not so much that it feels like work or that, or it's. So I came up with a motto that I use all the time. And it's got 3 parts, and you have to do them in order. And the first part is fly safe. So if you're not doing it safely, I don't want you on my wing. I don't want to be on your wing. We're just having fun here, so let's fly safe. Well, the second part is have fun. So if you're flying safe, but you're not having fun because you're so uncomfortable, then you're either too close and you need to back it out a little bit, or perhaps another hobby is best. Mm-hmm. The last priority for me is to look good. Now that may sound odd because obviously we got to look good. We're doing an air show. We're doing a flyover. No, because if you're looking real good and flying super tight, but you're not having fun because it's so much work and you're so stressed, I don't want you on my wing, because you'll have too much muscle tension. Your head won't be into it and it becomes unsafe. So fly safe, have fun, look good, in that order. And I foot stomp that through every phase of the clinic, because I see some people trying to push others too hard. Hey, you're 2 feet too wide. Get in there. And I'm like, just back off a second. He's not comfortable there yet.
Well, our mutual friend Pete Rouse was proud of me when I was flying within the same zip code. Oh, he's got a kick out of Pete. Pete likes that stuff, and Pete's a good formation pilot too. It's just fun. It is fun. It's rewarding and it's challenging, and the group as a whole. We always go to dinner, at the end of the, and I mean, people just have a great they feel like they've accomplished something. I feel like occasionally a guy feels, man, I just didn't down for the day. But most people, by the time you're having dinner, are like, hey, I'm ready to go again tomorrow.
Well, and everybody's gone through that process.
Yes.
And it's a whole new skill set. Something I compare it to is my tail dragger training. I'd never flown a tailwheel airplane until I had about 20,000 hours of nose wheel airplane flying. Man, is it different. And I tried to learn in a decathlon, and it was like I was learning how to fly all over again. Mm-hmm. Now, in 2 or 3 flights, I started to pick it up and not making such horrible corrections. Mm-hmm. But formation flying is kind of like that. The first couple of flights, you just feel terrible. You're like, man, I don't think I can do this.
Yeah.
2 more flights, you're like, yeah, I'm ready to solo. It's cool.
I appreciate your debrief comments, because being an Air Force guy, we used to have an instructor, and it was a little bit of a challenging formation sortie. And he'd walk in, and in his most intimidating voice, he'd say, all right, check your guns and knives at the door. It's going to be a rough debrief. And that's not necessarily going to translate real well to the civilian sector.
Yeah. So, and you mentioned tailwheel flying. You had a legitimate reason to get checked out in a tailwheel airplane, and that is because you eventually bought an RV-8 and started flying a Vans RV-8 in formation flying here. You want to tell us a little about that?
Sure, great segue.
That's why Chris pays. Well, he doesn't pay me, but if he did,
he gets a good title.
Yeah.
That's right. So I had my Bonanza at the Clay County Airport,
right?
GPH, and
which, by the way, Todd's a bigwig at that airport now.
he is. He's kind of a bigwig.
Yeah, come on, folks.
Just
please. We're not talking about me. Well, we can. No.
So my friend Kent Yohe was from Southwest Airlines. Had an RV for. It was the rocket version, the Harmon rocket. Yeah. And he'd given me a ride in it, and it was really cool. And I knew he flew with this group here called KC Flight, and they did that huge flyover in 2013 for the Chiefs football game.
Right.
And I think it was 49 airplanes, set a record. Well, that kind of got the juices flowing, and I kind of really wanted to do that. He kept bugging me, hey, sell that Bonanza, get an RV, you need to fly with us. Well, I didn't want to sell a Bonanza. The beach nuts were fun. Oshkosh was fun. But Dr. Owen, who John Owen,
right.
had an RV-8 about 3 hangars down from me at the Clay County Airport. And I always admired it, but I couldn't talk him into giving me a ride. He was a little uncomfortable with a heavy back-seater. I'm a full-sized man. And, I didn't learn until I flew that airplane what a difference it makes.
It does make a big difference, yes.
Some weight in the back. But anyway, I heard through the grapevine he might be selling it. So I approached him, and he made me an offer, and we worked it out. And a few months later, I had an RV-8 and went over to KC Flight and said, hey, here I am with my new airplane. Let me fly with you. And they're like, yeah, who are you? You're Bonanza guy. I don't know. And anyway, we warmed up to each other and ended up flying with him for the past several years, and about 7 years, I think, now. And I led a 24 ship of RVs at Oshkosh on a flyover a few years ago, and we've done lots and lots of paid air shows. We're semi-pros,
right.
So we actually do it for commercial purposes, and we've flown down at the Lake Air Show. We've flown football games, Royals games, Thunder over Louisville. Milwaukee Air and Water Show.
You guys ever do any private events? Like somebody's having a birthday or a wedding or something like that?
We do. We do lots of charity events too. There's a fundraiser. Sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a veterans charity event. We've overflown that. We've done high school football games. We go all the way from a 4-ship up to a 12-ship. We do quite a few missing man formations. If somebody calls up and said, hey, this World War II veteran passed away, and we'd sure like a missing man flyover at his burial, we'll make it happen. And of course, that's all free. We did for several years Orscheln Farm and Home stores were our main sponsor, and they had a company party out in Marshall, Missouri, and so we used to go out there and do big flyovers. And so it's like I said, it's semi-pro. The beach nuts are amateur.
Right, and I was going to ask, and I think you kind of just answered the question there about the difference. You mentioned when you showed up, and there was a little skepticism. They didn't know your background probably real well, and I go, who are you? But attitude-wise, is it a different attitude with the KC Flight guys? I mean, it's a little more.
I'm not sure I'd use the word attitude. There's definitely two very different clubs. I think KC Flight is more focused on the air show side of things, where the beach nuts are more, we're just out having fun flying together.
But that includes flyovers and so on.
Right, and it's not denigrating either club
No.
or their focus, but yeah, we're a bit more strict in KC flight. You know, if somebody's a foot out, we have to fix it because people are paying us to look good and fly these shows. The routines are much more involved because the airplanes are much more maneuverable. So we'll actually do flyovers where we split up into 2 different flights, and then we'll take turns going over the crowd, and airplanes will pop off of one formation and rejoin on the other one. And it's very dynamic.
Right.
Cool.
I mean, it's well done. And, you know, because of your involvement with both clubs, it's brought the two together for a lot of work together over the years.
Yeah.
A mix of airplanes, and I think again with the maneuverability, the RV-8 and so on, it works pretty well, doesn't it?
Well, and that was actually born of necessity. We had a few events where we could only cobble together maybe 4 RVs, and I said, well, it's just a flyover for, I think one of them was a KU homecoming. And it was during COVID, so there wasn't even a football game. It was virtual.
Oh my!
but they had us fly over the stadium area, and we couldn't get quite enough RVs to really look like we wanted it to. And since there was no maneuvering, we added 4 or 5 Bonanzas. And now it looked like this big gorilla flying over, this huge formation with lots of noise and smoke. And
well, I can say this because I'm a KU
well.
grad and you're a KU grad, but there's probably more airplanes in the sky than there were people in the stadium.
Exactly. It's funny because I had the same thought. Well, even the airplanes don't want to show up.
Yeah.
Well, and because I'm, have a foot in both clubs, we have another business I'm involved in. If you don't mind me plugging it.
I mean, see, this is the whole point. This is why I wanted to have you come and talk, and why I think our listeners find you to be an interesting person, because this business, the whole aspect, we briefly touched on the Airpark, and we'll get back to that, but you're involved in several businesses, so go ahead.
So the other business is called Carriage Houses of Johnson County, and it's a garage condominium business where people buy garage units in larger buildings within a development, and it's very upscale and it's very nice and has a clubhouse, and it's mainly for car nuts, people who collect classic cars, like to rebuild them. And this got started from a bunch of Southwest pilots, because we're pilots, so we know everything.
Well, yes, I mean, that
so
goes without saying.
Pilots are always good investors.
Obviously, we know how to develop real estate. So this development's out just east of DeSoto, Kansas, and it was 10.5 acres. We've since bought another 8 acres to the east, but it was a bunch of pilots from Southwest Airlines, and 3 of us were in the same crash pad. And it took me about 1.5 years to get on board, because I just moved here and didn't quite have the finances to join the rest of the group. But eventually they brought me in, mainly because I heard about it every time I spent a night at the crash pad, and bending my arm a little bit. But that has developed and gotten to be quite big, and we've done an actual air show over the property for it's at least been 5 years. And because I'm in both clubs, I bring both the Beach Nuts and KC Flight in to perform over the carriage houses at the car show. And what we do is we come in together as, like a 18-ship gorilla, and then we split up. And the Beach Nuts just kind of do a big lazy racetrack in different formations, and the RVs will do a more dynamic show on the east side of the complex. And everybody loves it.
Yeah.
It's
that's a real perk for people that
also
invest out there and have. It's a neat concept. I think that you guys have.
Yeah.
And
so Todd, what I'd like to do here is I would like to go ahead and close this out, and then let's bring Craig back on a second podcast to talk about Arrowhead Airpark, because we alluded to that at the beginning as a bait, because that's we would like to hear more about Arrowhead Airpark. But just in respect to the listeners' time, let's go ahead and close this one out. We'll bring you right back, so just stay tuned for the next podcast edition with Craig Wilcox here. So again, thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. You can check us out at flywildblue.com. Our number is 888-773-4249, and we're just very grateful that you listen to us.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.